So we're going to dive right in. Note to speakers, my laptop was wedging before this session, and so I'm very glad that Daniel Gustafson has a backup copy on his laptop, just in case, but we're going to dive in and hope it works. So the talk today is what 10 Postgres major contributors did to become a hacker. And I'm going to skip right over the part about me, but what's relevant is I've worked in Postgres since 2017 when I joined a company called Citus Data. And now I actually work at Microsoft, but I'm focused on the bottom right box of this big infographic of all of our work, which is the Postgres community side. So being here at this development event is exactly where I want to be and where I love to be in my job. But one of the other things I do at my job is I host a monthly podcast. I did not mean to become a podcaster. It happened by accident, but it happened over 2 years ago, and we just published our 26th episode. And as I look around the room, I see a few people who have been guests on the show, which is kind of cool. Thank you for coming, even though you know the drill. So it's focused on the human side of Postgres. So why people who work in Postgres or work with it do what they do, and how did they get there? And in fact, there are a number of Postgres major committers and hackers, major contributors, committers, and hackers who have been guests on the show. And 10 of them, well, 12 of them to be precise, but in 10 of the conversations, I learned some really interesting things about how they became hackers, what their journey was. And so that's what this talk is focused on. So on the screen, kind of top row, you'll see Alvaro Herrera, he's here, Melanie Plageman and Thomas Monroe, Andres Freund, Heikki Linnikangas, David Rowley, and Melanie again, Tom Lane, Daniel Gustafson, Robert Haas, and Bruce Momjian. So I think of all of those major contributors, the only one who's not here at this conference is Bruce. He has a very good reason for not being here. Heikki's not here? I just assumed I hadn't seen him yet. Okay. Well, he's kind of busy day. There's a lot going on for him today as co-founder of Neon. If you haven't heard the news yet, it's all over Google. Okay, so there's 2 caveats about the stories that I'll share with you. And the first is that I include exact quotes in some of the slides, but they're not exactly exact. I shorten them. All I did was cut words to, remove some repetition and redundancy. So the words that are there are exact. It's just missing some of the filler in between. The second caveat is that the stories I'm going to share, the journeys they took, your mileage may vary, right? These insights and learnings are specific to these 10 Postgres hackers who were all guests on the show. And so we'll probably have more guests on the show in the future, and there will be more stories, and the patterns may expand from there, because these are not the only ways to become a hacker in the Postgres community. But they're pretty interesting. So as I looked at everything and I went through all of those transcripts and kind of re-listened to some of the episodes, and I came up with an observation that there were 4 forces that shaped these Postgres hackers. And there were definitely some common threads between them all, as unique as their stories were. And so we'll talk about them. We'll go through catalysts and what were those triggers that kind of got them going down this path. And then the knowledge inputs, what did they have to consume, how they learned through code. And then there's this really interesting invisible curriculum that I picked up on that I wanted to share with you. So we're going to start with catalysts. And like everybody, and I put fingerprints on the screen because that seemed to be an apt metaphor. Their journeys were unique. What got them started was unique. But there's some of these stories I just had to share. And there's a phrase that I've heard a lot of people use in the Postgres community, which is that they got started because they had to, quote unquote, scratch an itch. Right? So there was some bug, there was some issue that got them going. And in Thomas Monroe's case, he was a user of databases, and they used MySQL, and all of a sudden, their software got mentioned, he thinks, on some US TV or radio show, and MySQL, which was underneath it, just melted down. And that began his investigation into Postgres locking to try to figure out, is there another database that could do a better job supporting our needs? So that's how he got started. But some of these and I already said congrats are due to Heikki, but years ago, congrats of a different kind were due. He had his second child, a little girl, and he was on paternity leave for several months. And this baby slept really, really well. And so he had all this free time. Like, what am I going to do? And so he started to explore what kind of open source projects he could become involved in. And that's how he got his start with Postgres. This story just blew my mind. And then does anybody know where this is, what it's a picture of? Yes, and it's in Copenhagen, more specifically. And so here's a screenshot of a schedule from Linux Forum 2005, and Daniel Gustafsson was there. And he was there because he wanted to listen to Robert Watson of FreeBSD. Because at the time, Daniel fancied himself as an operating systems person. That's what he was really interested in, and that's what he was working on. And it was total happenstance. He had a free couple of hours. He was walking by the room where Bruce Momjian was giving a 2-hour session, mastering Postgres administration, and he just walked in. And if you look at the details of his quote, and I put the episode numbers at the bottom if anyone wants to check them out, he's like, I can't explain why I went in there, but I'm very glad I did. And it turns out Bruce did a good job evangelizing that day, as Bruce does most days. How many of you have seen Bruce give a talk before? Show of hands. Okay, so almost half the people in the room. He's a good explainer, and it's something that I think probably many people have gotten involved with Postgres because of him. So this was total serendipity. And here's another piece of serendipity. Tom Lane, who was on the show last October, he told the story about how he did not see computer science as his future. He was at Carnegie Mellon. He was studying I don't remember what kind of engineering he was studying. His goal was to become a pinball machine designer. And he had to somehow took this computer science class, and the professor came up to him after the class and said, hey, you're really good at this. You really ought to go apply to be a research assistant. And so he did. And that kind of led him on his journey that ultimately led to Postgres, which I thought was kind of cool. And then Melanie Plageman, who you all saw up here on stage this morning, kicking off this event with Jonathan. She's one of the organizers. And if you like all the amazingness that's here this year and last year, she's definitely played a big part in that. But her origin story with Postgres is pretty wild. She saved her money, she quit her job, and she said, I'm going to learn everything I can because I want to work on Postgres. And so the quote that she has is, I think I would be unemployed if it weren't for mentorship. Because along the way in that journey of learning about Postgres, she did get a lot of mentorship from other engineers and did a lot of pair programming. And so that was kind of her catalyst. And I almost call this whole catalyst category serendipity because of that luck factor. But then I realized, no, it's not just about the luck, because all of these people were willing to say yes. They were willing to walk in that room, in that door, and learn more or take those opportunities. So to that extent, if you also have had that kind of luck in your career, paying it forward is something that a bunch of people in the Postgres community are really focused on. And shout out to Robert Haas, who partly inspired by the conversations here at this conference in Vancouver last year, has started a new mentoring program for Postgres that's pretty awesome. All right, I'm going to keep moving, though, because I know I'm tight on time. So next category is knowledge inputs. People, obviously, as they got started, needed to absorb and consume, and there were a few recommendations that I wanted to throw out there. And the first has to do with books. So I've got screenshots up there of From Nan to Tetris, which Melanie found super useful. The Art of SQL, and that's not the Art of Postgres, but the Art of SQL from David Rowley. And then Daniel, the purple book, the wizard book, and it's actually the dragon book, not the wizard book. Got to get the names right. So wanted to put those up there on screen quickly. And then another area that some of these folks learned, if you talk to David Rowley, He was on a trip traveling by himself in Australia. He was not yet a Postgres person, and he found himself in a remote part of Australia in the evenings with literally nothing to do. So he read the Postgres mailing lists ad nauseum. He enjoyed how smart all those people were, and then he also found himself reading the entire Postgres 9.1 manual at the time. So, that's how some people learn. And then Melanie, on her journey, she watched every single Andy Pavlo lecture ever. Or listened, I should say, because she was probably out running as she was listening to them. So that was part of her recipe to get to her dream job. All right. Let's go into learning through code as the next category. When are you going to pop up a number so I see my times? Oh, I can see. I'm 11 minutes in. Cool. David Rowley wrote a channel service bot for IRC. Like, this is the thing where people can't just read from books and know something. You kind of have to do things. A lot of people learn experientially. And so for him, he has this whole story about how he was writing this channel service bot. He started in C++, and then he had trouble, and so he switched over to C, and that got him into understanding more about hash tables and B trees and data structures. And so for him, it took a whole year that he worked on that project, but it was a fabulous learning experience. And what's really funny is after this quote that I'm sharing on screen, it continues to say, because you were looking at a lot of data processes, lookups needed to be fast, and I really wanted them. I just wanted to make them fast. And that is such a David thing to say, because to this day, he spends a lot of energy trying to make Postgres, particularly regarding the query planner and the query executor, faster. And if you talk to him about his early days, he was into motorbikes and tuning the motorbikes to be faster too. So it seems to apply to all aspects of his life. Bruce Momjian worked in a law firm. I had no idea. Early in his career, he was a consultant to some law firms, and he was really curious about database internals. So he tried to write 2 relational databases, and he ultimately failed on both counts. But obviously, there was a lot of learning involved in that experience. And then Tom Lane, he worked on structured systems software for, about 10 years? And then towards the end, they were doing some trading. They were running on top of Postgres. And so he was a Postgres user, and there were some bugs. He was running on HPUX, and they needed to fix some things. And so he submitted patches for those. And after that, he had some problems with listen and notify, and he wanted to make that work better. So he submitted some proposed bug fixes in that area too. So obviously, bug fixing is another way that people learn, at least amongst this group of 10. I loved his imagery of going down a Postgres rabbit hole. And he said, I got sucked down the rabbit hole of discovering there are actually all sorts of interesting things about this piece of software. Exact quote. All right. Melanie wrote a Postgres extension. She was trying to create some kind of souped up format function. And as a result, she was really inspired by it. She thought it was just so powerful and cool to be able to do that. Secondly, of course, she learned more about Postgres internals. And thirdly, that extension, according to Daniel, helped her land her job at Greenplum, which is when she then did a lot of pair programming and got a lot of mentoring and learned more and more and more about Postgres. So learning through code, I think this might be the last one, but Robert Haas, he wanted to do patch reviews as a way of learning and thought it would be a way to contribute and learn at the same time. But in the quote, I love this part where he's like, when I did patch reviews, I decided to think about what is Tom going to say? And can I say what Tom is going to say before Tom says it? And so that way maybe we get further along faster. And I thought that was kind of cool. All right. What is the invisible curriculum? We're going to go there next. And my clock says I have 10 more minutes. And you just gave me 5. So if you could let me know, that would be cool. So this is the stuff no one teaches you. It's about emotional intelligence, mindset shifts, communicating across cultures. And when I tried to think of a metaphor, at first I came up with a coat of armor, because you actually have to make yourself vulnerable. Like if you're going to not be defensive, if you're going to accept feedback and embrace it, it is making you vulnerable. So I was like, okay, maybe the coat of armor will work. And then I was like, well, but it's an internal state change. Like, you actually have to change your habits and change your emotional reactions to things and change your perceptions. So maybe the caterpillar metamorphosis is a better analogy. But I want to crank through some of these, depending on whether I have 5 or 10 minutes left. Can someone tell me? What? 10? Okay, good. So taking feedback is the most important thing you can do, according to Melanie. And she said her advice was, it's not about you or your patch. It's about whether it's the right thing for Postgres. And once you accept that and kind of embrace that, it's much easier to become an effective hacker. Tom had a similar point about feedback, where he talked about how you have to adopt a mindset that embraces feedback and understand that everybody's trying to make Postgres better. And so if they question or challenge or have feedback about your patch, or why don't you do it like this, that's because they're hoping to get to a better spot. And so the other thing he says in the second paragraph here that I thought was really cool is he's like, look, your patch and your ideas might be good sometimes, bad sometimes, or sometimes what you propose might get to be good after some tweaking. And that's kind of why you have to embrace that feedback. I'm going to get some water. So Heikki talked about how his first patch submissions, once they got committed by Tom Lane, they looked nothing like what he originally submitted. Like, there was very little resemblance, but that was okay. Like, he was happy with that. He's really proud of the patches, and I think he recognizes that without him initiating it and participating in it, it wouldn't have happened. So even though it's not exactly what he had in mind, he was still adding value. All right. Similarly, Bruce had like some stories to share about what it's like to get all this feedback. And he's like, at the end of the day, you have to realize that the patches that get committed contain the ideas of dozens of people. And so the analogy Daniel and I came up with is it's like a recipe that gets tuned and revised and improved over the years as it gets passed down through the family. And so Bruce's observation also was that when it finally gets committed, you have to admit it's probably so much better than what you originally submitted as a result of having all that collaboration. All right, I'm going to drink some water at some point. Thomas Monroe, pushing through the ups and downs. Oh, that was nice. All right. He talked about the emotion of it all, and just the quote unquote huge amount of expectation and disappointment. Because something might go in and it might get reverted, and then maybe it won't go in again until the next year, or maybe never. And you have to just learn how to manage your emotions and manage your ego through that whole process. And remember that we're all just trying to make Postgres better. Tom talked about how, and he was talking about open source more generally. This is not specific to Postgres, but how working in open source means that your failures will be extremely public. And that is a hard pill to swallow. His point was you can't look the other way and hope nobody notices, because it's there in the code. Everybody can see it. People are going to notice it. And so you have to deal with that. You have to own up to it. You have to say, oh, that's wrong. I'll fix that, right? You can't like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or oh, I thought of that. I was going to fix it. Like, none of that defensiveness. Just, you've got to own it. And then Andres told a really interesting story. Obviously, most of you may have seen him talk. He's here. He's giving a talk at this conference this year again. He's a native German speaker, and he speaks English very well. But in the beginning, in his communications, he was kind of translating directly from his technical German into English. And apparently that caused a lot of conflicts with people. And it took him a while to realize that, oh, okay, I can't translate directly from the German, because what sounds fine in German is not sounding fine in English. And so that lesson, and obviously in Postgres, we have people from all over the world, and English is not the first language for many of the contributors. So this, figuring out how to bridge those cultures and those languages is really, really important. And he said that when he made that adjustment, which I'm sure did not happen overnight, that the number of conflicts he was engaged in dramatically decreased. But he had to make that change. David's advice here is really, well, it might be about making a change. He was talking about how You shouldn't just show up with a patch you wrote that morning and submit it and hope it's going to land. Do your homework. Do your research. Make your work stand out. He said if you do that, it's going to be so much easier to collaborate with people who are committers. And in fact, there was a talk earlier today that I'm going to watch the recording of from Robert Haas, who was talking about kind of the whole committer mindset. And I do want to hear more about that, because when your patch gets committed, the committer has to, they kind of have to carry the burden. They kind of have to carry the bag from that point forward. So it's important to those committers that you've done your homework, because they're going to have to take the baton from you ultimately. Andres talked about how seeing user problems gave him an edge. So he was still consulting and working with Postgres customers when he first got involved in Postgres. And he says, that allowed me to see the problems people were having that other Postgres developers didn't necessarily see. Which then kind of gave me an edge or a small advantage over others. So it's interesting. A lot of times people talk about having empathy with user problems so that you can design better software, so that you can fix their problems. And I'm sure he believes that. I know he does. I know him. But in this case, he was talking about how seeing the user problems directly was, making them more valuable in some sense to the project. And then Alvaro Herrera, his podcast interview was more about conference participation and giving conference talks. So we didn't talk a lot about his origin story and how he became a developer. But he did have this one choice bit about when he was a second quadrant, and he had a lot of involvement with customers and how he felt like that made him better at prioritizing like which Postgres features to work on. So I threw that into the invisible curriculum as well. So here is the executive summary at the end. Like, we looked at catalysts, the inputs, learning through code. But I think for me, some of the book recommendations are great, particularly if you're starting out. So I don't want to diminish that. And yeah, if you are just starting out, the Andy Pavlo lectures are a great resource. There's definitely places to go consume, and reading the mailing list is a very popular recommendation. But it was the invisible curriculum that I thought was really powerful, because nobody teaches you that. That is something that a lot of people end up learning through experience. And for those just starting out, it's nice to kind of have that playbook, if you will, spelled out. So hence the reason for this talk. There's a whole bunch of people I have to thank for collaborating with me on this. Obviously, all of the Postgres major contributors who were guests on the Talking Postgres podcast. And there will be future guests on the podcast as well. And so who knows, maybe I'll give a deeper, more comprehensive version of this talk someday that surveys some of the people and tries to capture more of the learnings. But I do want to thank you, the people involved in advising me on this. And before we leave, I have two quick favors to ask you. And the first is, if you haven't heard of Posette, it's this annual virtual event that my team organizes at Microsoft. The chair is sitting right here in the front row, Teresa Giacomini. And I put the names of the talks and the speakers on there who are either speakers here at this conference who you might be seeing, or they fall into the category of like being Postgres contributors who are well known in the community who you might have heard of. So I don't think I could fit everybody in, but I captured a lot of those folks. So I thought that might be useful to help you figure out if Posette and attending those live streams is interesting to you. It's happening in June, obviously. And then my second favor is I have about 20 pairs of socks up here for if anybody's willing to do this 3-question survey. It just helps me in my Postgres work. Helps me understand priorities or what's working and how people are kind of finding out about things. So it's 3 simple questions. And if you do that QR code and you do that survey, I do have a thank you gift for you up here. That's different from the socks that are out at the front desk. So these are ones that we don't give away anymore, and there's lots of code on them if that helps. And that's it. Then just a thank you to all of you for coming today. And be sure to go to the reception tonight, because it is always a lot of fun. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. That was exactly 25 minutes. I am happy. Okay, thanks.
Great job. And just a reminder, there is a QR code. In addition to Claire's survey, there is a QR code on the door, so when you're leaving, please...
Oh yeah, feedback. Feedback is great for all the talks. The speakers love it. So do the conference organizers.